Hello, everybody. Thanks for hopping on today. We're going to give it just another minute here before we get started to give a little bit more time for people to join. All right, well, we can go ahead and get started. Again, thanks for hopping on today. We've got some great insights to share for both candidates and hiring manager. And hopefully by the end of this webinar, you're all going to walk away feeling really prepared for your future interviews, whether as an interviewer or interviewee. My name is Emily Newcomb, and I'll be sharing the screen with Lauren and Adam here for the next hour or so. But before we get to introductions, I want to go over a couple housekeeping items first. If you have questions throughout, feel free to drop that in the Q&A box at any time. We've saved some time at the end so we can go over those questions. We are also recording today's session, so we can send that out in a link afterwards in case you want to revisit anything. And then be sure to stay tuned till the very end because we do have some downloadable tools that you guys will want to be able to grab. So to start, like I said, I'm Emily Newcomb. I'm an account executive here at Disher. I've been here for just over 2 years. First in a talent consultant role with both Adam and Lauren, and now here on the sales team. Adam and Lauren are both senior talent consultants here, but I'll let them go ahead and introduce themselves.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, like Emily said, I'm Lauren Havey. I am a senior talent consultant here at Disher. I have been with Disher for a little over 2 years now. And prior to recruiting for Disher, I worked in internal recruiting and HR for a global company. So have both the perspective of kind of the internal recruiting side of things, along with working with an external recruiter. So excited to share some tips and tricks with you all today.
Yeah, like Emily said, I'm a senior talent consultant here at Disher. My name is Adam Whitworth. I've been here for about a year and a half. Prior to Disher, I worked in a super high volume staffing scenario for an automotive company. They were also global, so all the headaches you can imagine, all the situations you can ever imagine, I've probably experienced. But yeah, I guess, Lauren, do you want to get started?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. All right, so just a brief overview of what we're going to be covering today, but also I'd love for you all to just drop in the chat kind of what you're hoping to get out of this webinar today so we can focus on some of those things throughout. But really, we're just going to be covering the purpose of interviews, so both as a hiring manager and as a candidate, really what is the why behind interviews and why they're so important. And then interviewing tips as a candidate. So we know that it is a tough job market out there. So we want to give you guys the best tips to set you up for success so that once you do land that interview, you can confidently go through that process and hopefully land the job. So to kick us off, just want to see kind of a show of hands. So you should be able to just use the hand raise button. But show of hands of who has had a bad interview experience. Yeah, so a lot of us have. Who has had a good interview experience? Great. So I know that I myself have also had good and bad interview experiences. Adam, I'm sure you have as well. Do you want to give us maybe an example or two?
Yeah, I'll start with they're kind of funny, but they're the bad interview situations from the hiring manager side. One was where a candidate showed up. It was the third round of interviews. They were pretty much a shoo-in as long as they didn't come up and do anything weird. But when they showed up to the interview, they explained to the hiring team, which all were VPs or higher, that they actually had lied to their current employer to be there by saying that their spouse was in the hospital. And they just straight up said this to the hiring managers. I don't know why. But that sole reason, they were qualified in every other aspect, but just that trust was instantly lost. So it's important to stay professional, realize that even if you are getting comfortable with this company, they're still going to be your potential employer. Keep it professional. And then on the good side, my personal experience here at Disher, being hired in, throughout the whole process, communication was perfect. They were accommodating to my needs. I was relocating from the other side of the state. There were a lot of little nuances with my, coming over to work here. But yeah, they were with me every step of the way, super friendly, super transparent, which I really appreciated. At no point during the interview process or hiring process that I ever feel, that I was being misled. So yeah, those are, I guess, bad and good experiences that I've experienced.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Just speaking from my own personal experience, I have also had some good and bad interview experiences. And I was thinking back to when I was interviewing for jobs just out of college. And so my senior year, I'm applying, finally got an interview, and had the first round with a recruiter, was expecting it to just be kind of your typical phone screen of, do you check these boxes? Do you have any questions? And the first round interview was this recruiter asking me very pointed, very technical questions. And I had no experience with any of the things. And the conversation lasted probably about an hour. And never heard from that company again. But I left the experience thinking like, wow, if this is what interviewing is like, I am never going to get a job, because that went so poorly. I was not qualified. Like, it was just a horrible experience. And also then not having that follow up from the recruiter afterwards. I just felt like neither of us were really prepared for that situation. Thankfully, I did get a job, and I went to interview with a company that I ended up working for 4 years out of college. And that experience was totally different. The interview was much more of a conversation. And one thing that really stood out to me was that the hiring team really took the time to understand like what I had done during college, what I was interested in. And they also talked through with me all the different jobs that I was interviewing for at the time and really walked me through what they thought each position would look like and where my strengths and weaknesses kind of aligned with each role. So it was just really nice that they really took that time to get to know me as a candidate, me as a person, and help me navigate that post-grad experience of, this is my first job, I'm stepping into a career, and I really don't know what I want to do. So I think it's really important as an interviewer to understand where your candidate is coming from, understand their background, and really tailor their interview experience to their level. All right, so before we really dive into interviewing itself, just kind of give some background information on the state of hiring right now. So currently the unemployment rate as of August for the US was 4.3% and 5.2% in Michigan. So definitely a tougher job market at the moment. So understanding that when you're applying for jobs, it might take a little bit longer than in other markets. You're not only competing with the other people who are unemployed, but also the people who are currently employed and just looking for that next opportunity. So it's important to be patient throughout the interview process, throughout the application process, which I know is hard, especially if you're out of work right now. It can be stressful, but that's why we really want to make sure that if you do land that interview after an application, that you're prepared to really knock that interview process out of the park and hopefully end with an offer. So the importance of interviewing. Obviously, we all know it's an important skill for both interviewers and candidates. But as an interviewer, you're really looking for that next person who will join your team and be a high performer, build trust within your team, and that all starts with the interview. So you're looking for not only someone who fits the technical skill that you're looking for, but also is going to be a good culture fit for your team as well. On top of that, we want to make sure it's a great experience for candidates. So we emphasize that a lot at Disher. We want to make sure that we're being transparent throughout the interview process, providing feedback to candidates whenever we can, and keeping the interview process timely. It's hard when you're interviewing multiple candidates and want to make sure that you get everyone in every round, but you want to be moving as quickly as possible so that people aren't waiting months during one interview process to figure out if they're going to end up with an offer. And then we'll also dig into this in more detail later. You want to make sure that you're asking the right and legal questions. There's a lot of legal complexities when you're interviewing, and you want to make sure that you're not getting any information from candidates that could sway your decision, and that's not legal to ask. And then also, it's costly to make a hire. Data shows that it costs about 2 to 3 times of an employee's salary to find their replacement. And so you want to make sure that you do it right the first time.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up question to what you were just saying, Lauren. Through your experience, do you have a goal or time frame to create a great experience in terms of response rates or anything like that you can elaborate on?
Yeah, great question. So I always recommend that we have a 3-step interview process. So you're going to have that first initial phone screen with a recruiter or an HR person at the company, and then most likely probably a virtual interview, maybe an on-site with the hiring manager, and then have that final round interview with multiple people on the team. My rule of thumb is I always try to follow up with candidates within 24 to 48 hours after an interview, even if that follow-up is just, hey, how did this go for you? I'm still waiting to get feedback from the team, but I'll keep you updated. I would say generally within 7 days after someone interviews, you should have an answer from them of if you're going to move forward or not, especially if it's not that final round interview. When it is the final round interview, we understand that it might be you're deciding between 2 candidates and you just haven't had a chance to interview that final candidate yet. But I think it's okay to share that with the candidate who's waiting for feedback as well, and just say, hey, you know what, we're wrapping up the interview process with other candidates too. The interview process will be wrapped up with everyone by this date. We expect to have an answer for you a couple days after that. So in general, the interview process can vary because of many different factors on total timeline, but as long as you're communicating with candidates throughout that every step of the way and being as transparent as you can be, that will create the best experience for that candidate.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, to kind of follow up on the other end of this whole situation here is the candidate side. Obviously, if you've been applying for jobs, you want to land your dream job, you want to just get any job. And you want to make sure that the company and the role are fit for you as much as you are fit for them. So we typically want to make sure that you're, focused in on the right industries that you're interested in, the right roles, the right level of roles. I know it's real easy nowadays, especially on LinkedIn, to just go through and quick apply to 500 jobs in a day. But I think it's important to be intentional where you want to work. The more time you invest in being specific with where you want to work, the better results you'll get. I hear it from hiring managers all the time that when we have 3 or 4 candidates that are kind of head to head, it's the ones that were really showing that they wanted that job specifically, that company, that job, that location, just because it makes people a little bit more comfortable making that hiring decision that somebody will last a long time. Because like Lauren said, replacing them after 6 months is just back at square one and costs your company a lot of money. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So question for you now. As a candidate going into that interview process, what would you say are some things to kind of look for up front with a company, or maybe questions to ask at that very beginning to know if it is that company that you want to work for, so that you can be passionate going through the interview process?
Yeah, I would always start by just checking out their corporate website, maybe reviews online from other people. Granted, mostly negative reviews will be the ones on 9, all the positive ones. But yeah, I would just do my research on the company and then come prepared with specific questions about who you'll be reporting to, why is the role open, what how do you measure success in this role, especially in the first, 6 months? Just so you have a firm grasp that they know what they want, because oftentimes I know I've been to plenty of interviews where I'm there and it doesn't really sound like they know what they're looking for, yet they're in the interview process. Yeah, so be very specific, make sure that you understand what they're looking for and that you have a strong confidence that they also understand what they're looking for.
Yeah, thanks. All right. So then we touched on this a little bit, but definitely want to focus on creating that positive interview experience, really for candidates and that good candidate experience. So how do you do that as an interviewer? So we talked about, I always recommend the 3-step process, that initial phone screen, an interview with the hiring manager, and then that team interview. Um, but as an interviewer, you should make sure that you're coming with a list of questions prepared for the candidate that you're interviewing. You should have reviewed their resume beforehand so that if you do have any questions on their experience or if there are gaps in their resume that you're concerned about, you can really dig into those things during the interview. You also should keep things legal and intentional. So again, we'll get into what you can and can't ask during an interview later on. But you should also just be consistent with the questions that you're asking each candidate. So obviously, if it's a specific question about their experience, that might vary a little bit. But when you're asking questions revolving around the qualifications for the role, what you're looking for culture fit for their team, you should be asking every candidate those same questions so that you're keeping the interview process consistent throughout. And asking those consistent questions will also help you keep the hiring decision objective so that you can truly compare the answers from one candidate to another and make sure that you are measuring each candidate for the same thing and understanding what's really important for your team for success. And then obviously we're seeing a shift in AI being used during the interview process. So we always understand that AI is a really helpful tool. I think as an interviewer, you can use AI to really help you develop those job questions and figure out what you should be asking each candidate, to really dig into their skill set if they're a culture fit. But you still want to keep that human touch. So especially if you're following up with a candidate after an interview, providing feedback, don't just send those automated emails. Make sure you're calling them, giving them pointed feedback, because even if they're not the right fit for your team, they're going to appreciate understanding how they can do better for the next job that they interview for.
Great. Yeah. Quick follow-up question, Lauren. For this type of situation, do you typically change your line of questioning depending on the stage of the interview? So like the first stage may have like these very basic entry-level questions. Then once you narrow it down to stage 2, maybe your top 3, bring them on site. How do you adjust going from those initial questions to a deeper, understanding of the candidate? And how do you keep that consistent between the candidates? Because I'm sure, as you know, as you get in, people have varying backgrounds. You want to ask specific things about their experience, but also understand, they've all had different work experiences.
Yeah, great question. So kind of going back to that 3-step process, in our initial phone screen, even let's back up to before that. As recruiters at Disher, we're always going to have a kickoff meeting with the hiring manager that we're working with for a specific role. And we're going to ask that hiring manager, what are 3 must-haves that someone needs to have to be successful in this position? That could be technical skills, or that could be culture fit characteristics. Either way, whatever those 3 things are, that's what I'm going to be looking for in my initial phone screen with the candidate. So I'll make sure that they check those 3 boxes. And then I'll also just cover logistical things. So if the person has to be in office every day, I'll make sure they're okay with that commute, or if they're okay relocating. If they have to work a set amount of hours every day, I'll go over that with them. But really just making sure that the foundation for them to be qualified for the role is there. And then obviously, I'm not an engineer by trade. We recruit for a lot of engineers. So I can ask them general technical questions, but I'm not going to be able to dig into all of their technical background and qualifications and things that they've done. So in that next round with the hiring manager, that's when I expect the hiring manager to really dig into their technical background, get a deeper understanding of what they've done in the past, and make sure that they truly are qualified to do the role that you're looking for them to do. Then once we get to the final round interview, we should know at that point that this person can do the job that they're being hired to do. So now you're really digging into, is this person going to be a good fit on my team? Are they going to be a culture add? Does the rest of the team get along with them well? Is it someone that they can work with? So really just making sure in that last interview that there's no glaring red flags that didn't come up maybe in those earlier virtual phone interviews, and that the rest of the team feels comfortable with this person joining.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so from the candidate side, obviously people, nowadays aren't bringing printed out copies of your resume, but I would recommend it. So many times people are just pulled in the last minute to an interview, and they haven't had a chance to check their email, they don't know much about you, and they just need a quick 3-minute read through before they start their questioning. So I would always bring that just to show that you're prepared and that you're thoughtful. Like we said earlier, do your research on the role, the company, and the potential people you're interviewing with. A lot of information can be provided by the recruiter you're working with, or often like the HR generalist may send you a list of, hey, you're meeting with these people. So you can do some research, figure out, how long they've been there, their trajectory through their career with that company. So it'll really show that you care and that you're intentional about working at that specific place instead of just coming in with generic questions that you ask everybody. Another thing is dress professionally. That can mean so many different things depending on what you're interviewing for. I would highly recommend just asking the recruiter or the HR generalist what the dress code is. Unless you're like interviewing for a very specific position where it's obvious what it is, it's always best to clarify it, especially if you're coming from, let's say you're taking a few hours off work to go to an interview and then you got to go back to work. Maybe you have a uniform. Ask if that's okay. I know my interview actually at Disher, my first one was in my old uniform because I took the call on my lunch break. So, and I clarified beforehand that would be okay, just to make sure it was. And then the last thing is come with a list of questions ready to go. I would say probably come with like 5 specific questions, just because they will answer a bunch of questions just during your natural conversation. And at the end, when they, ask if you have any questions, it'd be nice to still have something to ask that wasn't already answered throughout the process. And then, a good question I always like to end on is just like, is there anything from our conversations today that gives you any reservations about my ability to do the job? And I think that really allows them to, re-ask you a question to clarify more, or any questions that they've been thinking about the whole time, like, oh, Adam's not qualified because of this. They can just bring it up one last time before you leave, so they're not left questioning the next steps going forward.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Kind of back to your dress professionally comment, like you mentioned, that is so different depending on the job that you're interviewing for. I know I was working on one role with a manufacturing customer, and there was some outdoor work, and I had a candidate show up for the interview in like business casual interview attire, which you would normally think that is dressing professionally and how you should for an interview. But the hiring manager called me afterwards and was like, yeah, we're not going to go with that candidate. They clearly didn't understand the role. This is how they showed up. And like, we wanted to walk the site floor, but couldn't because they were wearing too nice of clothes. And I was like, okay, like note to self. Now I will warn candidates that they should come prepared in old jeans and work boots for this interview. Even though that's not normally what you think of as dressing professionally, that's what this role required. So it's always good to check with your recruiter or whoever your main point of contact is to really clarify that dress code and make sure that you're coming prepared for the job.
Yeah, that's a great example. I fully agree with that.
Right. So now we're going to get into crafting effective questions for interviews. So just some general guidelines here. I really want to focus on avoiding questions that point right to the answer. I think especially people who are not used to interviewing all the time, they can tend to kind of give too much background detail as to why they're asking the question that you can just point the candidate to the exact answer that you're looking for. And then you're not really understanding like if the candidate truly believes that or if they're just good at interviewing and know how to tell you what you want to hear. Again, don't try to assess anything non-job related. So that prep that we talked about before even beginning the interview process is really important here to understand what are the key qualities, skills that you need from this person joining your team, and then create interview questions to assess those things. You shouldn't be judging anyone throughout the interview process based on things that are not related to the actual qualifications of the role. We're going to get more into the STAR methodology, but really making sure that you're asking behavioral questions so that you're getting real life examples from candidates that show what they've done in the past, not just hypothetical situations that they can tell you what they might do. So making sure that you're crafting those good behavioral questions. So the STAR methodology. So like I said, from an interviewer perspective, we're going to be asking behavioral questions because those are the best predictors of future behavior. And so using the STAR technique and what that is, it is really getting into what was the situation at hand, what were the tasks that you were working towards, what were your actions towards that task, and what was the end result. So what did you accomplish or what did you learn from that? Now, it's a little bit different as an interviewer because you might be thinking, if I ask all of those things in a question, that's going to be a really long question. And so it's not always that we're going to do that as an interviewer, but you should be looking for those things in the candidate's answer. And let's say they tell you the situation, the task, and the actions, but they leave out the result. Then that's where you as an interviewer can just ask a follow-up question to figure out what that result was. And it's okay if a candidate doesn't include all those things to begin with, to kind of coach them through that process and keep asking those follow-up questions until you get all the details that you need. So an example of a behavioral interview question that I always like to ask is describe a time when you had multiple tasks to complete under tight deadlines. How did you prioritize and manage your time? So Adam, do you want to maybe demonstrate from a candidate's perspective how you would answer that question?
Yeah, before I answer the question, I would just say it's important for you as a candidate to practice this before you go to the interview. Most of the time you can anticipate some questions they might dive deep in, especially based on your resume and how that's structured. So just get used to explaining all of your answers with historical examples. You know, you don't have to be necessarily like in this order, but this helps you stay on track with that. So I'll just use like a personal example that I've used to answer this question. The situation was at my prior employer, or I would say my current employer at the time. We actually had a huge merger from a company from one of our plants down in Indiana. We had 3 months to fill 65 different roles, or 65 total roles under 14 different positions. And we had, you know, a tight deadline of 3 months to do it. So of course there'd be a lot of things that we had to juggle during that process. And then here's where you'd say your actions. So for our actions, you know, we had more market visibility. We went down to Indiana and interviewed the current people that were working there and seeing if they'd be open to relocating up to Michigan. So we got some candidates that way. We, you know, juggled with different types of sign-on bonuses and different structures for that, which really helped. You know, and as we went along the way, I mean, 3 months isn't that much time to get 65 people for a new production line. But we were able to do it with actually 6 weeks to spare. We all came together, the hiring managers and myself, and we just worked as a team to really make sure that everything was handled in a timely manner. Like if we sent a candidate for review, the hiring manager would respond within 30 minutes, like that type of situation, because we knew every day mattered. So yeah, the results were good. We ended up launching that line smoothly, and our customers were happy.
Great. Yeah, so Adam's a pro. He checked all 4 boxes in his initial answer. So I don't have any follow-up questions to ask there, but again, he covered every single part of that STAR methodology. And like Adam said, it's important to practice this beforehand. I know when I've been interviewing for roles in the past, I have my resume printed out, and by certain bullet points on my resume of things that I've done in the past, I will write out just like quick bullets of what was the situation, what was the task, what was the result, so that I remember to talk about those things during the interview, because interviews can be stressful for everyone. Sometimes you have points you want to bring up and you just forget about it. So having those notes is not a bad thing. And practicing a few of these answers on really key things that you want to highlight is always going to set you up for success. All right. So now we're going to do a little pop quiz. So we'll have a poll popping up here, and just want to get your answer on this poll. And once we get some responses here, we'll talk about it. And Adam, I can't see the poll or the results in my end. So if you want to talk about it, maybe let us know.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can see it either. Maybe Kimberly or Emily has access.
Yeah, we have access.
Oh, I see it now. I can handle it. Sorry about that. All right. Yeah, it looks like right now 100% of the answers are none of the above.
All right, we got some rock stars here. So that is correct. Yeah, you can't ask any of those questions. You actually can't ask any of these questions on the screen. So we talked about earlier with making sure that any question you're asking is related to the job itself. So the question, if they need to pick their kids up at 3 p.m., no, you can't ask that, but you can say the working hours of this position are from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. We expect you to be in the office during that time. Are you able to work those hours? And then the person can say yes or no. But you can't ask the question about them having kids or their reason for not being able to. Again, the salary history one, I've gotten a lot of questions about that in the past, because I'm sure as you've been interviewing, you've been asked about your salary expectations. You are definitely allowed to ask people what their salary expectations are and what they're looking for. But you can't ask them what they were paid in their last role. You can only ask about what they're looking for next. I know that hobbies are a big one that I always talk to hiring managers about. They're like, I want to get to know the person, the candidate as a person. I want to know about their hobbies outside of work. But generally, you shouldn't ask those during an interview because they're not related to the job. Again, we work on a lot of engineering roles here at Disher. And so I'll have hiring managers who say, well, I want to know if they like to work on cars outside of the office, so I know if they like doing this in their free time. And while that is semi-related to the job, someone might really enjoy working with their hands during the day, doing engineering work during the day. But when they get home, they're like, no, I'm done with that. I don't want to do it outside of work. So it's not a sign of how well they'll do their job. So we always just say, stay away from it. You can talk about hobbies with someone once you've hired them and they're on your team.
Yeah, I appreciate you diving into those examples. We did have a couple last minute submissions. One was the information about your salary, and one was tell me about your hobbies. So I think everything was answered.
All right. And then here is just more information on questions not to ask. So we got the illegal questions, and then just some legal questions for examples that might get towards the information that you're trying to ask in the illegal questions, but just in a better way to ask it. And so again, we'll send out all this information after the webinar so you can review this table in more detail. But if you do have questions on it at the end, we can always dive into that. Oh, Adam, I think you're muted.
Appreciate that. Yeah, to respond to the illegal interview questions, Obviously, if you're comfortable answering the question and you don't feel any certain way about it, you can just answer it and move forward. It's probably harmless. But if you're not comfortable answering those questions, you can ask the interviewer if they can expand on it more and how it's relevant to the job that you're interviewing for. This will give them a chance to rephrase it in a more appropriate way, or make them realize that it's not related or relevant to the job, and they'll just move on. You can answer the question by addressing the concerns behind the question. So some of those examples prior were, are you authorized to work in the US? Like that would be the correct way to say it. But if somebody said, are you a US citizen? You could respond with, I have the legal right to work in the US, or something along those lines. So you're not really giving away sensitive information, but providing the answer they are seeking. Yeah, I think that's it for those.
Yeah. Just one example that I'll provide of a situation that I've encountered is, so I've had a hiring manager decide after interviewing a couple of candidates that it would be nice to have someone who can speak Spanish as a candidate because they'd be working with a primarily Spanish speaking workforce. They were like, it's not a requirement of the role, but it would be nice to have. Can you start asking candidates if they speak Spanish? I was like, I cannot during this phase of the interview process because I have already interviewed other candidates in this phone screen. So if I start asking people now, that's kind of changing the qualifications and might be a fishy situation. However, we haven't started the next phase of the interview process yet. So if you want to ask candidates that, as long as you're asking every single candidate that, you can, because it is a direct requirement for the role. Even though it was a nice to have, it would still make a difference in the role. However, if there were no reason for asking that question, if they weren't working with a bilingual workforce or there was no need for it in the position, then you should not ask that question. But because it was a helpful qualification for the role itself, we were able to squeeze that into the interview process.
Yeah, so as we alluded to earlier, being prepared with questions for the end of the interview is very critical. Again, it shows your interest in the company, how genuine you are in the opportunity. Like we discussed earlier, what are the main priorities for this role in the first 90 days or 6 months? Again, this gives you an understanding of their understanding of the role and your expectations going in and whether or not you feel comfortable achieving those expectations. Sometimes they're realistic, sometimes they are not, and you can ask follow-up questions regarding that. Another good one is, where do you see this company in a year's time, 3 years time, et cetera? And how will this role make a difference to that vision? So then it gives you insight. Again, you're interviewing them as well to, make sure it's a company that's going to be around, has a strong vision, and then see how you can actually be a contributing member to that vision. Are there opportunities for progression within this role or department? That may be important to a lot of people that are, looking to climb the corporate ladder or have, certain opportunities become available over time and what they can work for or work towards. And then, like I said earlier, what I always do is after the conversation today, are there any concerns you have about my ability to be successful in this role? Again, it just gives them another opportunity to ask any lingering questions or any counter arguments or things like that they may have come up earlier that they just weren't structured to ask. And now's their opportunity instead of going back and having a meeting with all the hiring managers and talking about an issue and when they could have just asked it right then. And then, of course, what are the next steps in the process? This keeps you informed on their interview process, their structure, the timeline you're looking at. Most candidates are interviewing at multiple places at the same time. If you're actively interviewing and let's say you have a final round interview or a pending offer, let them know that. Let them know like, hey, I got an offer from another company. They want to know within 5 days. So hopefully they can make a response or at least give you insight on whether that's even possible for them to get to a stage far enough within those 5 days. Again, it's perfectly normal to ask these questions and encouraged. And I would just be transparent and genuine in all your questions, and I think they'll appreciate that.
Yeah, great examples. Yeah, and I think really just the most important thing from this is make sure that you have some questions to ask at the end of your interview. They should be thoughtful questions, but I know that there's times where sometimes I've been interviewing with multiple different people. I get to the last group and I'm like, all my questions have been answered. It's okay to ask the same question twice to a different group of people, especially if it's around company culture. They might give you a very different answer, and then that will give you a follow-up question of, well, can you clarify this? Because Adam told me one thing, but Emily told me another. So what is the culture actually like here? So it's okay to repeat questions during different phases of the interview process, but just making sure that you have those thoughtful questions prepared for the end of your interview is definitely very important and will leave a lasting impression on your interviewers.
Speaking of questions and what you should ask at the end of the interview, if any of you have questions for Adam and Lauren, feel free to throw them in the Q&A or you can put them in the chat. I'll also put my email address in the chat as well. So if you guys have questions after you've really processed all the great knowledge that Adam and Lauren shared, you can shoot an email my way. It's emily.newcomb@disher.com, but I'll put that in the chat as well. So while we're waiting for everyone to process all of it and ask a few questions, I have some myself for you guys. So could you guys share for hiring managers, how do you balance those must-haves versus nice-to-haves when you're interviewing candidates?
Yeah, I'll go first, I guess. I see this all the time. Expectations change over time. That's for sure. I would say when a position is fresh, there's a lot of these. We want this perfect candidate, this unicorn that has X, Y, and Z, all these very high level things, and they realize that over the course of maybe a couple months of searching, that they've found some people that are fairly close, and that it's not really necessary. A lot of the times they're trying to replace a specific person in mind, which is not possible. So you got to really stick with what's important to the role, what you're capable of training and learning on. Again, if something's trainable, I wouldn't have that as a must-have. A lot of the times, the critical must-haves I would say are like culture fit. That's something that shouldn't be changed or adjusted or, yeah. So I think that's where I would start. I guess, Lauren, do you have any follow-up?
Yeah, no, I would agree with Adam. I think I always challenge hiring managers to think about what are things that you can train on and what are things that you can't train on. And there might be some things that you could train on, but maybe you don't have the time or the resources to train someone on. So then I would move that to a must have for the situation. But then like Adam said, I always emphasize like you can shape someone's technical skills. You are probably not going to change who they are at the core of their being. And so you want to make sure that you are really digging into culture fit during the interview, making sure that there's someone who fits the behavioral characteristics that you need for your team. And also thinking about, if you look at the skill set of your team right now, what's missing? And so maybe you don't need someone who has the same skills as the other people on your team. You need someone who has that one skill that's missing, and the rest of your team can help upskill them in everything else. So really just kind of focusing on those things while I'm talking with hiring managers, helping them figure out what is the must have and what is the nice to have.
Yeah, quick follow to that. I would say, again, from the candidate side, when you're looking at these job postings and you're seeing these requirements, they always try to put the word requirement. If they're looking for somebody with 10 plus years, like if you have 7 years in the role, still apply. They're going to be interested if you are capable of doing the job. Realistically, they know there's not much of a difference between somebody with 7 and 10 years. They just throw out a number. So don't disqualify yourself just because you're not exactly what they're looking for. If you're close enough, I would encourage you to apply. Let them figure out if you're somebody they're interested in. Because most of the times that's an initial idea. Like that job description is like the perfect candidate from day one if we had 100 candidates with all the qualifications in the world. But again, things adjust over time. So yeah, I wouldn't let that discourage you and just keep applying.
Great, thanks. And kind of in that same vein on more of the candidate or job seeker side, what are some common mistakes that you see job seekers or interviewers or interviewees making that are pretty easily avoidable?
I'll go first again, I guess. Yeah, the common mistakes I would say are really not coming to the interview with an understanding of the company and the role you're interviewing for. People are applying for like so many jobs. I've seen it in LinkedIn all the time. Like I've applied to 500 jobs in the last 3 months, haven't got an interview. If you get an interview, come prepared. You should know everything about the role. You shouldn't be asking questions like, what does this job do? When in the job description, it lists 15 bullet points of what they do. Come with specific questions or gaps in the job description to show that you actually read through it thoroughly, put some consideration into it. Because I think nowadays, especially, you can just tell when somebody's intentional with what they want versus somebody that's just like mass, sending out applications, just trying to find any job. You want to find the candidate that wants the job.
Yeah, I think one of the worst things for me is when I call a candidate for a phone screen and their first question for me is, wait, what job is this for and what company is this for? When they have all that information beforehand, they have the job description, they have a link to the company website, and we've scheduled this time to talk. It just shows me that they're probably not super interested or invested in the job search process. Um, and we do have a resource that we'll be sharing for everyone after that Emily talked a little bit more about, but just the job search readiness checklist. And I think one thing on there that's really beneficial to use, and I always did this when I was applying for jobs, but just keeping track of every job that you're applying for. So what the position was, who the company was, and when you applied for it, so that you can always reference back to that once someone reaches out to you, so you know exactly what they're talking about and can be informed and ready to research if they do want to schedule that initial interview with you.
Yeah, well, like Lauren mentioned, you want to go to the next slide there, Lauren, with the first is that job readiness checklist that she mentioned. If you scan that QR code and you're looking for jobs, this is a great tool to make sure that you're prepared in not only the job search, but the interview process. So you're feeling confident in going into all of those interviews. So if you don't scan it and get it, it's always on our website later. If you're like, gosh, I wish I had downloaded that, feel free to go to the dishertalent.com and download that. And then the next slide that we have is for more of the hiring manager side. So training your team up on how to interview. It's a great resource to know that you're doing the right things. You're kind of hitting all of those boxes that Lauren and Adam touched on, and you're asking the right questions and the legal questions, not the illegal ones. So, like I mentioned, those are both on the website. We also have a lot of other downloadable resources for hiring managers, job seekers, whatever it is you are looking for in the talent market. We've got a lot of resources. So I will put our website in the chat and feel free to check that out. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today. I know we'll end a little bit early, so maybe give you guys a few more minutes here in your day. And as always, feel free to reach out. My email's in the chat. You can shoot me an email if you ever have any questions. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks, Emily.
Thanks, everyone.
Oh, somebody wants to go back to the previous slide.
Oh. All right, I think we're good.